Hey all, this is my general overview of Mythic Brackenhide Hollow from the POV of a Casting Mistweaver. I've tried to note where I like my cooldowns, which mobs to prioritize for CCs and interrupts, and commonly unavoided damage that we shouldn't have to heal through, but probably will. Bracken Warscourge casts Hideous Cackle, an interruptible AoE fear that can easily cause a wipe, and they'll also use Rage Storm, which is a 10-second channeled whirlwind with a 3-second windup. It's worth thinking of the Mystics and Decay Speakers as a pair, since the Decay Speaker will spawn a rot chanting totem that teaches the nearby Mystics to cast Witherbolt, a disease dot on a random player that grows in strength until it's dispelled or expires. Also dodge out of the Decay Speaker's Withering Burst, which is a green swirl on the floor that applies the same disease. And if you can, interrupt the Mystic's Earth Bolt just to get them a little closer to cleave. Bonebolt Hunters drop toxic traps that you want to avoid, marked by green circles on the ground. Tripping one of these really hurts, but it also spawns a toxic pool that's equally dangerous. Focus healing on anyone that's picked by the Hunter's Bone Bolt, which is a 20-second bleed, that also increases damage taken by subsequent Bone Bolts if someone gets picked twice in a row. Now that we've covered these important mobs, we've also got Claw Fighters, Bone Crushers, and Hyenas, which all apply a Grievous-style bleed to the tank called Bloody Bite. Don't let this get out of hand, just remove it entirely by healing them above 90%, like with the Grievous affix. In terms of unique abilities, Claw Fighters will fixate on a random player and cast Vicious Claw Mangle on them, which hits 10 times over 5 seconds. You'll want to save a stun or a CC for this if you can, otherwise just pump some heals into them. The first boss is Hackclaw's Warband, and they should be cleaved down evenly since they all gain a 30% damage and haste buff once one drops below 15% health. These bosses also gain a haste buff based on how much health your group is missing, so keeping everyone topped off is in your best interest. Rira's attacks are frontal cleaves, so don't stand in front of her. She'll cast Blade Storm and chase a random player while she does it, so steer clear of that. But she'll also cast Savage Charge, which targets a random player, and the tank needs to be the one intercepting this charge. Gashtooth will cast Gash Frenzy, shadow stepping behind everyone and leaving a stackable bleed on them. Just like the Grievous-style bleeds, heal them above 90% and the bleed falls off completely, ideally before he casts it again. But what's more important is that Gashtooth will cast Marked for Butchery, after which he teleports to a random player and hits them 8 times fast over 4 seconds. Make sure you watch for his targets, since you'll have to keep them alive for those 4 seconds. I plan to save Life Cocoon for later in the fight when the bosses are enraged, since Marked for Butchery will hit for a lot more. Trick Totem will cast Greater Healing Rapids, which is a heal that must be interrupted. He'll also spawn Hex Trick Totems that incap the healer for 15 seconds, or until DPS can kill the totem. The tank also gets disoriented occasionally, and this is called Decayed Senses, which you want to dispel ASAP. It increases their physical damage taken too, which leaves them wide open to getting one-shotted by Rira's Savage Charge. In the case that the tank and healer CCs occur at once, along with Rira's Savage Charge, it's a simple priority. Free the healer, dispel the tank, and help make sure the tank can intercept the charge. Going left after the first boss, you'll run into Vultures, which cast an interruptible Screech that does massive group damage if allowed to complete. Rotpo Stalkers will cast a frontal Bone Bolt Volley that does damage and puts a bleed on any one hit. It has a 2-second cast time, so it doesn't give you a whole lot of time to react. These Stalkers also throw Scented Meat on a random player, which draws the aggro on any beasts you're in combat with, so maybe don't pull extra beasts with the Stalkers, or have CCs ready to help that person kite for 10 seconds till the debuff drops. Skulking Gutstabbers hit the tank with the same bleed from earlier that you remove by healing them above 90%. They'll also apply a Withering Poison dot that reduces haste and movement, so dispel whenever you're able. If you went right instead of left after the first boss, you'll run into Infected Lashers, which stack a bleed on the tank, and Decayed Slimes that trigger a burst when they die, indicated by a swirl you should dodge. Shapers, Elders, and Wilted Oaks spawn more Lashers, and Wilted Oaks cast an interruptible Necrotic Breath frontal, as well as a large AoE stomp, both of which you'll want to avoid. The second boss, Gutshot, comes with 2 Hyena adds, and she'll occasionally cast Meat Toss, which draws their aggro to a random player for 10 seconds. This also sends the Hyenas into a double damage frenzy, so don't let them reach their target. They can and should kite them into Gutshot's ensnaring traps. Just be mindful the traps only root for 6 seconds, and Gutshot will try to cast Master's Call, which frees her Hyenas from any CCs, so make sure someone interrupts that. The hyenas will also apply a massive slow and a reduction to healing taken to anyone hit if they catch them, so be ready to throw Life Cocoon on their target if they get caught. 2 other abilities to watch for. One is Gut Shot, just like the boss's name. That's a tank buster with a knockback, which can easily knock an unsuspecting tank into a trap. The second ability is Bounding Leap, cast by the hyenas, which is just a brown swirl to indicate where they're going to jump. Anyone hit takes a burst of damage plus a 4-second stun, which is no good for anyone. After a bit of familiar trash, you'll run into Stink Breath, a mini-boss, which occasionally tracks a random player and casts Stink Breath, disorienting anyone in a frontal cone for a few seconds. Obviously you want to spread out around him to minimize how many people get hit. He'll also do Violent Whirlwind, that's basically a channeled Blade Storm, with an added knockback if you get hit. Avoid this, but also be mindful of where you stand, since you can easily be knocked off the bridge by it. The next boss, Treemouth, has 2 frontals. One is Decay Spray, which goes in a random direction, and that everyone should dodge. This spawns adds that you'll want to interrupt so they don't do burst damage to the whole group, and these same adds burst on death, leaving behind pools of decay. The second frontal is Vine Whip, which is just a tank-facing frontal that does damage plus a knockback. At 100 energy, he'll cast Grasping Vines, pulling everyone in for 4 seconds. Make sure you run away from this, but know that one person has to get eaten each time, or else he'll get a massive damage buff. You'll want to alternate who gets eaten, since being digested makes you take 200% more damage if you're eaten a second time. DPS can break this person out of Treemouth's stomach by damaging the boss, but the person inside can still use abilities, and should absolutely receive healing throughout. Planning out who's going to get eaten is a good idea, so that these people can save personal defensives for it. On the last stretch of trash, whichever way you go, you'll see some familiar mobs, but also some new ones. Witherbiters stack the same bleed on the tank that you saw earlier, so make sure you keep your tank healed above 90% to remove it. You'll also run into disease slashers later on that apply this same bleed, but they'll also cast Decay Claws, which absorbs a small amount of healing on the tank, meaning you'll have to heal a bit extra to top them off. Filth Callers spam Decay Surge on players, but they also try to cast Rotting Surge, a 3-second cast that spawns a bunch of decayed ground. Stun or use other forms of CC like Ring of Peace to prevent Rotting Surge from casting, and then dodge the green swirls if the cast does complete. Vile Rot Hexers cast Withering Contagion on a random player, indicated by a green circle around them. This applies a spreadable disease that you want to dispel ASAP, since it does damage over time and spreads to anyone who gets too close. The Rot Hexer also casts Siphon Decay periodically, which draws the disease from players to give itself a damage buff, so if you dispel too slowly or spread it by accident, he'll only end up stronger. Fetid Rot Singers cast Burst of Decay, which is just some more green swirls to dodge. He'll also summon totems that cast Withering on all players every 10 seconds, which is the less important disease dot from earlier that grows in strength the longer it remains undispelled. So prioritize dispelling Withering Contagion, the spreadable dot cast by the Rot Hexers, but also deal with any Withering debuffs when you can. Decay Triarch Rathai is the last boss, and she'll apply Withering Rot to anyone hit by her abilities, a stacking, permanent dot that also reduces damage done for 8 seconds. At 100 energy, she'll also cast Decaying Strength, converting players' debuff stacks into a damage buff on herself. This cast also creates withered eruptions around each player, which you'll want to stay slightly spread to prevent any splash. The splash range is very obvious, it's indicated by a green circle around each player, so this makes it very simple. Rathai also hits the tank with Decay Strike, which absorbs a small amount of healing. Just top them off whenever you see this. Finally, she'll cast Choking Rot Cloud, a frontal that goes towards the tank, and this spawns a cloud of decay which moves around the encounter area. Dodge the cloud as it floats around to avoid getting extra stacks, but also kill Rot Burst totems as they spawn, or they'll spam Rotting Burst, which deals damage to everyone and applies additional stacks of Withering Rot. And that's my overview for this dungeon. I plan to make similar videos for the other dungeons as I gather enough gameplay footage, so stay tuned for those if you found this one useful. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and have a good one.